well for your large
Kirt,
gas?
So I want to expand this question. Can somebody benchmark the GHG emissions per gallon equivalent? That's
Sure. I mean, for a large fleet that uses a large amount of gasoline and not diesel, I'll get to that in a second. Gasoline, you're looking at 30 to 35, 40% reductions in those greenhouse gases you're talking about. Just the metrics on what we've been able to do with taxi fleets in Seattle, you're talking in the tens of millions of pounds reduction. So it's very substantial. But I'll just leave it at 30 to 35% reductions based on its gasoline. On diesel, there's folks whose entire purpose is to reduce diesel particulate matter reductions.
Yep.
There's lots of money and funds from the public sector that are aimed at those goals. Natural gas does a wonderful job of reducing particulates when compared to diesel, as opposed to diesel particulate filters or urea devices which go on these trucks. Switching them over to natural gas is an altogether more effective and cost-effective and environmentally effective solution.
But that 30 to 40%, that doesn't include emissions at the wellhead, right?
No, I'm talking about out of the tailpipe.
Okay.
You're talking about methane emissions at the well, for example?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's huge.
There's another example of we don't know enough. And we have look at where we've come from in this process in the last decade. We went from, as said, Alan Greenspan testified to Congress in 2003, I believe. Was that the year of our big, really running short? I think it was 2003. We came within 7 days of running out of stored gas in the United States. We had a very cold winter. Supply was declining. And now all of a sudden, look what we got. We have gone. You're right. We don't have the answer.
Yeah, I just, there's a lot of information out there, but I think it's important to measure these fuel sources from wellhead to ignition. So if you're just focused on the tailpipe, an electric vehicle is going to be, has no emissions. But if you focus on the natural gas and coal and other fuels that are necessary to generate the electricity to fuel the electric vehicle, it's still probably going to be better than natural gas, but not that much better. So it's important, and what Jim said is absolutely right. I think the industry is trying to understand what's happening at the wellhead with regard to emissions. So Cornell University's studies aside, which have been discredited, except for those who are peddling it. There are real issues there that need to be addressed by the industry. And think about from the industry's perspective. They don't want that stuff going up in the air. They can sell it. So why wouldn't they if they can capture it? So there are issues out there. You're absolutely right. It's an important one for us to look at, and Jim's got it right. We don't know.
Well, let's be fair about it. The reality is that they still flow a lot of gas. They waste a ton of it, and it's a fair point. All right, lots and lots of questions. Let me see. We'll start. You've probably been the longest right here.
On the distribution and the compression, what of a tank of natural gas that's compressed, how much energy is required to get it to compressed state? Same question for LNG, and then just general low pressure distribution, what fraction of energy is required to move this up around? Do you have an idea for that?
I can talk about the net energy issue.
I'll simply, and then I'll let these guys take this, but I'll simply state that the electrical demand of a natural gas compressor, a large-scale natural gas compressor, is not insignificant.
I could talk a little bit about the transportation and distribution of natural gas. The efficiency loss, moving gas from the wellhead all the way to the end is less than 5%. So just as an example, I would say the pipeline companies which have gigantic compressors, if you ever have the opportunity, go visit a pipeline compressor station. These are tens of thousands of horsepower, giant turbines. In fact, it's the first V12 I ever saw that was the size of a house. But they burn natural gas, and they pass the cost of that through to their customers, and it's typically 2% fuel charge. So it takes about 2% of the gas they're moving to move it. It's pretty minimal when you think about, in comparison, let's say again to electricity, which loses high voltage transmission 10% from the plant to the substation. It's just lost.
Garret was very diplomatic in his response. I'll give you an example from my background, creating liquid natural gas on a small scale. We have between a 25 and a 35% parasitic level. And we use that much fuel to create that energy to go to something else. It just makes sense.
And on LNG shipping, which for example, when Morgan Stanley sent their tanker 14,000 miles here, probably on Tuesday to Japan, the U.S. gas, they're assuming a 10 to 15% loss on that trip. The cost. So you start adding these, the LNG conversion does eat.
We can help them fix that. That's a business opportunity.
So just one more comment on the, we don't have time to jump into this, but one more part of the WCTA, the clean part. We haven't talked about renewable natural gas or biomethane, which is not going to be a huge component, but it can be a significant component in terms of getting to a carbon neutral.
Did you see the news on Apple's facility in South Carolina? They're going to feed their fuel cell with at least that's the plan, for the source, with biomethane feed source, which is another. Fuel cells on natural gas lines is another.
And depending on where that fuel comes from, for example, an anti-digester that has a negative GHG capability, you can plan to get to a
Again, let me give you some context for this. That was my last business. We were involved in taking landfill gases and cleaning up and making LNG. Tough business. But to put that in perspective, and it was a great story. You would clean it up, you'd make LNG, you sold it to the garbage trucks, hauling the garbage in, or burning LNG from their garbage from a feeder. Fantastic story. Clean, renewable, domestic, cheap. Money loser for the company.
So there's a feasibility study underway.
Yeah.
Yellowstone State funded that is looking into taking CHP digesters to RNG.
Let me just put perspective on it though, because he's right. It could be a huge piece. We have a landfill here in King County. They're trying to clean it up, put it in the pipeline. Hasn't worked great. They have equivalent gas of about 50,000 gallons a day of LNG. And for years that was being flared to the atmosphere. LNG sells today for around $1, 50,000 a day. I mean, that could fuel all of the metro buses, all of the school buses, many of the transportation fleets from a clean, renewable source. What I can tell you is the technology is probably not quite there yet to make it economically viable. It's getting closer. I promise this person. Here you go.
So, back to the greenhouse gas emission portfolio here. Obviously, the EPA rule on greenhouse gas emissions that is just being promulgated now means that not only are we shutting down coal plants like you mentioned, but we're not going to be building any new ones. So that's a tremendous opportunity, as you've talked about, for gas plants as a generation replacement. But I was wondering if you all could comment what happens when we get a price on carbon, which I think is coming. Maybe not next year, but in the foreseeable future, we will have a price on carbon. So how does that factor into the idea that in 2030 you'll have a quarter of the natural gas portfolio will be generation? Does the carbon price affect that at all, and how does that affect the overall supply and demand portfolio?
Well, so I'll be paying that much more for electricity.
Yeah. First of all, I would suggest you go, if you read the EPA piece.
I had not read that.
Yeah, I would suggest you do that, because there is a loophole in it large enough to fly an A380 through. Okay? It's going to get tough to build a new plant, but they will be built if the economics are there.
An A380? Well,
Yes.
Boeing 780s.
And
I got you.
Yeah, so I would suggest you take a look at that, because there's a big hole.
All right, right here, please.
So just to get the last concern out of the way, how long will it be until there's enough material to talk about the seismic issues? That seems like the biggest game changer for the public. Jim?
I think seismic issues are pretty close to in the next couple of years being understood, as far as because you've got your geological issues, you've got permitting issues that were a major. There was numerous mistakes by state governments as far as permitting certain wells in known location. I think the importance of fracking at lower horsepower which requires cleaner water. I think